Part 3, Chapter 19, Langley, Virginia. Clayton Caston returned to the patient file jacket, which had just arrived this morning, and briefly scrutinized the color copy of the small photograph. A handsome but unremarkable face, though with something almost cruel about the sharp regularity of its features. Caston did not dwell on the image long. There were some investigators who liked putting a face on their quarry. He was not among them. Digital signatures, patterns of expenditures, those were far more revealing than the contingent details of what one already knew, that the person in question had 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. "Adrian," he called. "Yes, Shifu," Adrian replied, pressing his flattened hands against each other in a prayerful gesture of mock homage. Shifu, Caston had learned, meant instructor, and was an honorific used in martial arts movies. The young had a curious sense of humor, Caston reflected. "Any progress with the personnel list for Ward 4W? "No," Adrian said, "but you got the 1133A, right?" "I did indeed, impressively expedited." "Plus you saw I got an actual copy of the patient file jacket with his actual photograph." "I did," Caston said. "As for the personnel list, though, well, they're saying that the lists are being updated. We'll take whatever they have." "That's what I said. No go." Adrian bit his lower lip contemplatively, and his gold libre stud glinted in the overhead fluorescence. "I gotta say, it's been tough. I swear they're literally battening the hatches." Caston arched an eyebrow, mock censorious. Literally? Or figuratively literally? "Don't worry, I haven't given up." Caston shook his head with a fading smile and leaned back in his chair. His unease was growing. The data he had received felt predigested somehow, prepared, as if it had been meant for eyes like his. More and more information about Tarquin had been furnished concerning his assignments as a member of the Political Stabilization Unit of Consular Operations, but there was not a molecule more about Tarquin's civilian identity, and nothing at all about how he had been committed to the Parrish Island facility. Normally that was a paperwork-intensive process, yet somehow the paperwork pertaining to Tarquin's confinement there was unavailable. Parrish Island was a secure government facility. There had been extensive records of each employee, yet Caston's every attempt to get personnel records from Tarquin's ward had been stymied. Caston doubted that the clerks were complicit. He even doubted whether his counterparts at the Department of State would dare to circumscribe his investigation. But that meant that the blocking agent or agents were at another level, either lower, beneath the radar, or higher, above scrutiny. It was galling, really. Caston's phone chirped with the double tones of an internal call. Caleb Norris was on the other line. He did not sound happy. Caston was to come see him immediately. When Caston arrived at the office of the Assistant Deputy Director of Intelligence, Norris appeared as morose as he had sounded. He folded his ropey arms on his chest, tufts of curly black hair protruding from his cuffs. His broad face wore a look of distraction. "Word from the top. We've got to bring this investigation to an end." Norris's eyes did not meet Caston's as he spoke. "There it is." "What are you talking about?" Caston controlled his surprise. "Thing is, there have been some high-level communications between State and the DCI, Norris said. His forehead was gleaming with sweat and flushed in the slanting late afternoon sun. "The message we're getting is the investigation is interfering with a live special access operation." "And what are the details of that operation?" Norris shrugged with his whole upper body. His face was darkened with a mixture of annoyance and repugnance, neither directed at Caston. "Special access, right? We haven't been entrusted with that information," he said, sounding flustered. "They say Tarquin's in Paris. They'll pick him up there." Pick him up or pick him off. Who the hell knows? It's like a gate has slammed down. Beyond what I've said, we know bupkis. The proper response to an outrage, Casson said, is to be outraged. Damn it, Clay, we've got no choice on this. This isn't a game. The DCI himself is saying hands off or heads off. You hearing me? The DCI himself. That son of a bitch wouldn't know a polynomial from a polyp, Caston snapped. It's wrong. I know it's wrong, Norris flared. A goddamn institutional power play. Nobody in the intel community wants to acknowledge the supremacy of Central Intelligence. And until we've got the backing of the Commander-in-Chief and the Senate, it isn't going to happen either. I really don't like to be interrupted, Caston persisted. Once I begin an investigation. Norris shot him an exasperated look. What you think, or I think, that's really the least of it. There are procedural principles at stake. But the fact is, the deputy director caved on this. The DCI has made his decision, and it's our job to fall into line. Caston was silent for a long moment. Don't you find this whole thing irregular? Well, sure. Norris began to pace unhappily. It's damned irregular, Caston said. Doesn't sit well with me. Me neither, and it doesn't make a bit of difference. You're closing the books, and so am I. Then we're burning the books, and we're forgetting we ever opened them. That's our marching orders. Damned irregular, Caston repeated. Clay, you gotta choose your battles, Norris said in a defeated tone. Don't you find, the auditor replied, that it's always your battles that choose you? He turned on his heel and started to walk out of the ADDI's office. Who the devil was calling the shots anyway? Caston continued to brood as he returned to his desk. Perhaps one irregularity deserved another. His eyes darted from the files on his desk to those in Adrian's less tidy workspace, and the wheels in his head kept turning. They say Tarquin's in Paris. They'll pick him up there. Finally, he took out a yellow pad of paper and began to make a list. Pepto-Bismol, ibuprofen, Maalox, Imodium. It wouldn't do to travel without such medicinal precautions. He'd heard about traveler's tummy. He shivered as he contemplated the prospect of getting into an airplane. It wasn't about heights, the fear of crashing, or the sense of enclosure. It was the prospect of breathing in the endlessly recycled breath of his fellow passengers, some of whom could well have tuberculosis or some other airborne mycobacterial infection. The whole affair was so unsanitary. He would be assigned a seat from which some flight attendant had sponged up vomit earlier in the day. Intestinal parasites could lurk in every crevice. Blankets would be distributed, and with them, long, spirochete-ridden hairs clinging to them by static. He had a Merck manual in a lower desk drawer, and it was all he could do to keep himself from starting to flip through the index. He exhaled noisily, his sense of dread deepening, and put down his pen. Once he arrived, there would be the repugnance of foreign food to cope with. France would have its own parade of horrors. There was no getting around it. Snails, frogs' legs, mold-veined cheeses, the distended livers of force-fed geese. He didn't know the language. Communication problems would be a constant peril. He might order chicken and get instead the flesh of some revolting creature that tasted just like chicken. In a tuberculoid, weakened state, such mishaps could extract an even greater toll. He shuddered. It was a very heavy burden he was taking on. He would not do so if he had not been sure that the stakes were very high. He picked up his pen again and began making further notes. Finally, after filling most of the front sheet with his neat script, he looked up and swallowed hard. Adrian, I'm going to be traveling to Paris on vacation. He tried to keep the dread out of his voice. That's super, said Adrian with inappropriate enthusiasm. A week or two? I think so, Caston said. What does a person normally pack on such a trip? Is this a trick question? Adrian asked. If so, the trick's not on you. Adrian pursed his lips contemplatively. What do you usually take on vacations? I don't go on vacations, Caston replied with wounded dignity. Well, when you travel. I hate traveling, never do it. Well, except to pick up the kids from camp, if that counts. No, Adrian said, I don't think that does count. Paris will be great, though. You'll have an incredible time. I very much doubt that. Then why are you going? I told you, Adrian, erect a slight display of teeth. Vacation. Nothing to do with work at all. Nothing to do with our investigation, which I have just been officially instructed is to be discontinued. Comprehension dawned on Adrian's face. You must find that irregular. Highly. Verging on the anomalous. Quite. Got any instructions for me? Adrian brandished a ballpoint pen. Shifu? There was a glint of excitement in his eyes. I do have a few, now that you mention it. Caston allowed himself a small smile as he leaned back in his chair. Listen well, little grasshopper.